Welcome in, everyone.
Today's deep dive is taking us into a world that often flies under the radar,
Okay.
the world of patient transport services drivers.
Yeah.
Now, you've all sent in a mountain of material for this one.
We've got articles, guides, even some really insightful personal profiles from people in the field.
Yeah, it's been impressive.
And let me tell you, the more I read...
The more I realize this is not your average driving job.
Yeah, it really is.
This is a vital part of the healthcare system.
It is.
And to be honest, one that I personally hadn't thought much about before.
I think that's true for a lot of people, actually.
But then you start seeing the numbers.
One article cited nearly 5 million patients annually rely on these services.
5 million.
That's huge.
It is huge.
And that really drives home the point that these drivers...
They're not just getting people from point A to point B.
Right, they're not just driving.
They're ensuring those who might not otherwise make it to that doctor's appointment.
That life-saving treatment.
Absolutely.
They get there safely and with the care they require.
It's about understanding the complexities of each individual's condition.
That's really key, isn't it? Because we see this term vulnerable patient come up a lot in the materials.
All the time.
And we're not just talking about folks who are elderly, though that's certainly part of it.
We're talking about people with disabilities, those recovering from surgery, anyone who needs that extra layer of support and understanding during transport.
Okay, so for our listeners who might not have a clear picture in their minds.
Paint us a picture.
Okay.
What does a typical day look like for a patient transport services driver?
Well, picture this. You start your morning at a busy hospital.
Okay.
Maybe you're assisting a post-op patient to the vehicle.
Making sure their IV lines are secure.
Oh, wow. So there's a medical aspect to it, too.
Absolutely. And maybe even calming their nerves a bit with a friendly chat.
So it's not just about the technical stuff.
Not at all.
There's a human element, too.
Huge part of the job.
Okay, so then what? What happens after the hospital?
Later that day, you might find yourself at a private dialysis center, expertly navigating a wheelchair-accessible van.
I can see how those driving skills would be essential.
Especially in a busy city.
Exactly.
And then maybe even heading out to a rural community, using GPS to locate a patient's home for a scheduled pickup.
It's a lot of variety.
It really is, and that actually surprises me a bit.
I'll admit, I had this narrow view of the job in my head.
I thought it was mainly hospitals.
But it's so much more diverse than that.
It really is.
And I'm seeing from these profiles...
It's not just hospitals, it's private practices.
Absolutely. And you might even be employed by a county government, transporting patients to and from specialized care facilities.
Wow, like what? Give me an example.
Like those focused on Alzheimer's or dementia care.
So each location, each patient.
It's a whole new set of requirements and challenges.
Exactly.
And speaking of challenges...
The sources mentioned these drivers work with some pretty high-tech equipment these days.
They do.
It's not just about knowing the rules of the road, is it?
It's so much more than that.
What kind of equipment are we talking about?
Well, you've got your GPS systems, of course, but it goes way beyond that.
We're talking hydraulic lifts for wheelchairs.
Oh, right, of course. Specialized restraints to ensure patient safety during transport.
That makes sense.
And even vehicles equipped with basic life support systems.
Like what?
Like oxygen tanks and defibrillators.
Wow. So these drivers need to be as comfortable operating this equipment.
As they are handling a steering wheel.
Exactly.
And I'd imagine there's a whole other layer of training involved in knowing how to use that equipment safely and effectively.
Especially in potentially stressful situations.
Absolutely, you're spot on.
You can't just hand someone a defibrillator and say, good luck.
No, not at all.
There's got to be specialized training involved, right?
The sources really emphasize that.
For instance, there's passenger safety and securement training.
Okay, and that goes beyond the basics of securing a wheelchair, right?
Right. It delves into the specifics of safely transporting patients with different mobility aids.
Different medical devices.
Even behavioral consideration.
Wow, I'm starting to realize.
This role is so much more than I initially thought.
It's a lot to juggle.
It really is.
It's like this delicate balance of technical know-how.
And genuine caregiving.
Precisely.
And speaking of caregiving.
We haven't even touched upon the emotional demands of the job yet.
And I have a feeling.
That's where things get really interesting.
So we've talked about the technical side.
Navigating those high-pressure situations.
Right.
But what about the human element?
I mean, dealing with patients who might be in pain?
Anxious or even just having a bad day?
Sure.
That's got to require a unique skill set.
You're absolutely right.
One guide even used the phrase street-level psychology, which I found quite apt.
I like that.
It's about reading subtle cues.
Adjusting your communication style to put patients at ease.
And knowing when a reassuring word.
or a moment of quiet understanding
Yeah.
is just as important as getting them to their destination on time.
Absolutely. And in fact, one of the profiles mentioned a driver who encountered a patient having a panic attack during transport.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and the driver actually pulled over.
Took the time to calm the patient down.
Even offered a few breathing exercises she'd learned.
Wow, that's going above and beyond.
It really highlighted
The importance of quick thinking.
and genuine empathy in this role.
Absolutely, and it's not always about those dramatic situations either.
Sometimes it's just about recognizing when someone needs a listening ear.
One driver shared an anecdote about an elderly gentleman who clearly felt isolated.
Ah,
And a short drive to his appointment became a chance for him to open up, share stories about his life,
that's lovely.
and feel a moment of connection.
That really speaks to something you touched on earlier.
This idea that patient transport services drivers,
They're often on the front lines.
they are,
Witnessing firsthand the challenges and triumphs.
of our healthcare system.
Absolutely. They see it all.
They see the impact of limited access to care,
Disparities in health outcomes.
the incredible resilience of the human spirit.
It's true, and I imagine that takes a toll.
Not just compassion, but a certain level of, I don't know, emotional intelligence.
You've got it.
So let's say someone listening is thinking, this sounds like me.
Okay.
I've got the empathy, the organizational skills, the ability to stay calm under pressure.
Right.
What does a career path look like?
Is it just entry-level driver, or is there room for growth and specialization?
That's a great question.
And the good news is there's a lot of room for advancement.
That's always good to hear.
One of the articles provided a really helpful breakdown of potential career trajectories.
Oh, perfect.
So you might start as a driver assistant,
Okay.
getting firsthand experience with patient interaction.
Basic equipment operation.
Makes sense.
From there, you could progress to a driver role.
Taking on more responsibility for route planning, patient assessment.
Even some basic medical care during transport.
Okay, I'm seeing that stepping stone approach now.
Exactly.
You start with the foundations.
And then as you gain experience and expertise,
You can take on more responsibility.
and you can pursue specialized certifications too.
Oh, right. The sources mentioned those.
CPR and first aid are often prerequisites,
Right.
but there's also emergency vehicle operations, defensive driving.
And even certifications specific to certain types of patient care,
Like what do you mean example?
like geriatric transport.
Oh, okay. So working with elderly patients.
Oh, bariatric transport.
Bariatric, that's about,
Patients with obesity.
right. So tailoring your skills to specific needs.
Precisely.
And I imagine those certifications,
They not only deepen your skill set.
but they probably open doors to new opportunities too, right?
Absolutely.
Like, could you move into a management position with the right experience?
You could.
As you climb that career ladder, there's the potential to move into supervisory or management roles.
Overseeing teams of drivers, managing logistics, even developing training programs.
Wow, so you could go from driving the ambulance to basically running the whole operation.
In a way, yeah.
That's incredible.
One of the profiles featured a woman who started as a driver
Okay.
and eventually became the director of operations for a large nonprofit transportation service.
Wow. So it's possible.
Our story really illustrated how much room for growth there is in this field.
That's amazing. I love hearing stories like that.
It really is amazing to see how a role...
That might seem pretty straightforward on the surface,
Yeah.
driving,
Right.
how it actually has all these layers of expertise and these different potential career paths.
It's more than just a job. It's a whole field.
Yeah, and it sounds like there's something there for all sorts of skill sets and interests.
Absolutely.
Whether you're really technically minded or you're a real people person.
Exactly. And speaking of interests...
One of the things that really stood out to me from these resources was the emphasis on ongoing learning.
Oh, yeah, I noticed that too.
It's not just about getting those initial certifications and calling it a day.
Right, like you don't just learn it all in the beginning and coast.
Exactly.
Because this is a field that is constantly evolving.
Oh, absolutely. We're talking advancements in medical technology.
New approaches to patient care.
Sure.
Evolving regulations, you name it.
Right, you've got to keep up with it all.
For someone who thrives on expanding their knowledge base, this field offers constant opportunities to learn and grow.
And there was a lot of talk about that in the sources, too.
Like industry conferences, online training modules, even subscribing to professional journals.
It's all part of being a true professional in this line of work.
And it makes me think about something you mentioned earlier.
About the future of this field.
Right, because we've talked about the aging population.
The rising demand for healthcare services in general.
And what did the sources say about the challenges and opportunities facing patient transport services drivers down the road?
Well, one thing's for sure.
The demand for these services, it's only going to increase.
Yeah, that makes sense.
The guide actually cited a study projecting a 20% surge in demand for patient transport services
20%. Over what time period?
over the next decade.
Wow, that's huge.
It is, and that means more routes to coordinate.
More patients to care for,
Sure.
and a greater need for skilled professionals.
And that makes those career advancement opportunities
Even more significant,
absolutely.
because you're not just talking about filling existing roles.
You're talking about a whole wave of new positions opening up.
Precisely. And it's not just about quantity either, it's about evolving needs.
How so?
Well, as medicine becomes more personalized,
And technology plays a larger role.
right.
Drivers will need to adapt.
So it's not just about driving anymore.
Right. We might see more specialized roles emerge, for example.
Give me an example.
Drivers trained in handling at-home IV therapies,
Okay, interesting.
managing portable oxygen systems.
Or even assisting with remote patient monitoring devices.
So it's almost like they're becoming an extension of the medical team,
In a way, yeah.
not just transporting patients.
But facilitating care in ways we haven't even imagined yet.
Precisely.
And that brings us back to the core of why I think this deep dive has been so illuminating.
It's not just about understanding one job or one career path.
It's about recognizing this hidden backbone of our healthcare system. It really is. These drivers are on the front lines every day.
Ensuring that people, regardless of their age, their mobility, their background,
They have access to the care they need.
well said.
And they bridge the gap, wouldn't you say,
Absolutely.
between medical expertise and the people who need it most.
They're the link.
And as we've learned today, it takes a unique blend of skill, compassion, and adaptability.
To navigate that bridge effectively.
Couldn't have put it better myself.
Well, on that note, I think we've given our listeners a lot to think about today.
This deep dive,
Yeah.
it really went beyond my expectations, I'll be honest.
Revealing the complexities, the challenges, and honestly, just the profound impact of patient transport services drivers.
It's been a pleasure, as always, to delve into this with you.
And to our listeners, thank you for joining us on this journey into the often overlooked world of patient transport services.
We encourage you to keep asking questions, keep exploring, and keep diving deep into the world around you.
Until next time.